Marilyn Monroe explained, "Fame, the Kennedys, and a death that raised questions." The O. There are nights that feel quiet only on the surface, the kind where the city keeps breathing, but the noise is muted, restrained, as if something important has already happened and the world has not yet caught up. In the early hours of August 5th, 1962, Los Angeles was like that. Warm air, empty streets, radios still on in living rooms where sleep had not fully arrived. By morning, a single name would cut through the calm and travel faster than any official statement could contain it. Marilyn Monroe was dead. The announcement was swift. The language was clinical. The explanation arrived almost immediately, neat and final. And yet, almost from the moment it was spoken, something about it refused to settle. Not in the public imagination, not in Hollywood, and not in the quiet corners of American history where power and secrecy tend to overlap. This story does not begin with a theory. It begins with a contradiction. Marilyn Monroe was the most recognizable woman on the planet. Her image was everywhere, printed on posters, projected onto screens, absorbed into the collective memory of an era. She was laughter and light, carefully framed. At the same time, she lived a private life defined by isolation, control, and constant negotiation with forces far larger than herself. Few people in history have been both so visible and so alone. The question that lingers is not simply how she died, but how someone so publicly fragile could move so close to the private machinery of power, and what that proximity meant in a world built on secrecy. This documentary explores public theories and historical speculation surrounding Marilyn Monroe's political proximity. It does not assert conclusions. It examines context, contradictions, and unanswered questions that have endured for decades. To understand why confusion was possible and why certainty never fully arrived, we need to step back. Not to the final night, but to the world that made it inevitable that her death would never feel simple. The early 1960s were a time of visible confidence and invisible fear. The United States projected strength, optimism, and moral clarity. Underneath, it carried the constant pressure of nuclear confrontation. The Cold War was not an abstract concept. It was a daily reality shaped by classified briefings, intelligence operations, and an unspoken understanding that some truths were too dangerous to release. Government secrecy was not an exception. It was standard practice. Intelligence agencies expanded rapidly, surveillance normalized quietly, and information flowed upward far more easily than it flowed out. Official statements were expected to be trusted. Questioning them was often framed as disloyal, unpatriotic, or destabilizing. At the same time, American culture was undergoing a visible transformation. Television brought public figures into living rooms. Celebrity became a form of soft power. Hollywood was no longer just an entertainment industry. It was an export, a narrative engine, and occasionally a political tool. Actors were invited to political events. Singers performed at diplomatic gatherings. Public figures crossed boundaries that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. These relationships were often informal, undocumented, and protected by discretion rather than policy. In this environment, proximity mattered. Marilyn Monroe's rise was not accidental, but it was carefully managed. She was shaped by studios, contracts, and expectations that controlled everything from her image to her schedule. Her public persona emphasized innocence, desirability, and emotional openness. It concealed intelligence, ambition, and growing frustration with the limitations placed on her. By the late 1950s, Monroe was no longer just a studio creation. She had broken contracts, challenged executives, and demanded creative control. She read extensively. She questioned authority. She resisted being treated as ornamental. This shift unsettled people who preferred her predictable. It also brought her into rooms she had not previously entered. Hollywood and Washington shared more than photo opportunities. Studio heads cultivated relationships with politicians. Political figures understood the value of celebrity endorsement long before it was openly discussed. Appearances were strategic, invitations calculated, and conversations often left undocumented. For women, especially women whose public value was rooted in appearance, these spaces were complex. Access came with expectations. Silence was often assumed. Being present did not mean being protected. Marilyn Monroe moved within this world without formal power, but with extraordinary visibility. She attended events that blurred lines between entertainment and governance. She formed personal relationships with individuals who held influence far beyond Hollywood. These connections were rarely acknowledged publicly, and when they were often minimized or reframed as harmless. The era did not encourage transparency about such relationships. It encouraged containment. At the same time, Monroe's personal life grew increasingly unstable. She struggled with insomnia, anxiety, and dependence on prescribed medication. Mental health, especially for women, was treated as a private failing rather than a medical reality. Confidentiality existed, but so did control. Doctors communicated with studios. Studios communicated with the press. Personal struggles became liabilities to be managed. This created a dangerous overlap. A person publicly framed as emotionally fragile, privately connected to powerful figures, living in a culture that resolved discomfort by simplifying narratives. When Marilyn Monroe died, the country did not just lose a celebrity, it lost a symbol. Symbols are rarely allowed complexity. The speed with which an explanation arrived mattered. In moments of national shock, swift clarity can feel like relief. It can also feel like containment. The official narrative offered closure at a time when uncertainty was deeply unsettling. It fit what many already believed about Monroe. It aligned with how she had been framed for years. But alignment is not the same as understanding. There were practical reasons the public accepted the explanation. Trust in institutions was higher. Deference to authority was normal. The media landscape was narrow. Investigative journalism existed, but it operated within limits, shaped by access and consequence. There were also cultural reasons. Marilyn Monroe's struggles had been made visible in selective ways. Emotional vulnerability had been part of her public image. A tragic ending felt narratively complete, almost expected. It required no additional discomfort. What was less visible, and therefore more difficult to process, was the question of what she knew, who she spoke to, and how those relationships fit into a broader political landscape defined by secrecy. This is where the unease begins, not with accusations, but with context. With the recognition that the early 1960s were not designed to handle ambiguity well. They were designed to project certainty, even when certainty was incomplete. Monroe lived at the intersection of fame and fragility, access and disposability. She was valued but not protected, heard but not always taken seriously, present in rooms where decisions mattered, but without authority over how her presence would later be interpreted. When she died, those contradictions did not disappear. They hardened. Official explanations tend to prioritize clarity. Public memory tends to preserve simplicity, but history often resists both. This documentary does not claim that answers were hidden deliberately. It does not assert that silence proves wrongdoing. It examines why silence was structurally possible, why records were limited, why testimony conflicted, why the absence of information became as influential as the information itself. To understand that, we must first understand the world Marilyn Monroe lived in. A world where power operated quietly, where reputations were curated, where the personal lives of public figures were managed for stability, not transparency, where women's credibility was often undermined by narratives of emotional instability, where proximity to authority could be both an invitation and a risk. In that world, death was not just a personal event. It was a political one, even when no politics were named. By the time the public learned of Marilyn Monroe's death, the story had already been framed. The language had already been chosen. The tone had already been set. What followed would not be a search for meaning, but a process of acceptance. And yet, for many, acceptance never fully arrived. Not because of a single piece of evidence, not because of a definitive contradiction, but because of a lingering sense that something about the context did not fit neatly into the explanation provided. That sense has endured not because people want scandal, but because unresolved stories invite reflection. Because when power, secrecy, and vulnerability intersect, even ordinary explanations can feel incomplete. Before exploring what was said afterward, it is necessary to sit with what existed before: the climate, the culture, the systems that shaped how stories were told and how they were closed. Only then does it become possible to understand why Marilyn Monroe's death did not remain a private tragedy, but became a lasting question. In the next section, we will examine the official narrative itself, not to challenge it, but to understand it on its own terms. The official narrative. The official story of Marilyn Monroe's death begins with precision. Dates, times, and conclusions are clearly stated. There is no ambiguity in its final determination, and no suggestion within its own framework that further inquiry was necessary. According to authorities, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home during the early morning hours of August 5, 1962. She was 36 years old. The cause of death, as reported, was an overdose of barbiturates. The manner of death was ruled a probable suicide. This conclusion was reached quickly and communicated confidently. In the early hours of that morning, Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, reported noticing that Monroe's bedroom light was still on well past midnight. Unable to get a response through the locked door, Murray contacted Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. He arrived at the home and entered the bedroom through a window. Monroe was found lying face down on her bed, nude, with a telephone nearby. Emergency responders were called. Paramedics confirmed that she was deceased. Law enforcement arrived shortly after. From the beginning, the scene was described as calm. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry. The room appeared orderly. This presentation would become central to the official interpretation. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office took charge of the investigation. An autopsy was performed later that day. Toxicology tests revealed extremely high levels of barbiturates in Monroe's system, including pentobarbital and chloral hydrate. These substances were commonly prescribed at the time for insomnia and anxiety, conditions Monroe was known to struggle with. The coroner concluded that the concentration of drugs was well beyond therapeutic levels and incompatible with accidental ingestion. Based on the physical evidence, medical history, and absence of external trauma, the death was ruled a suicide. The language used was measured. Probable suicide became the official classification, reflecting a standard coroner's term when intent is inferred rather than directly observed. The phrasing was presented as careful and professional, not speculative. Law enforcement supported the ruling. The Los Angeles Police Department stated there was no indication of foul play. Investigators reported no suspicious activity at the scene. Interviews conducted with those present in Monroe's life at the time did not yield evidence contradicting the conclusion. Within days, the narrative solidified. Media coverage echoed the official findings. Headlines emphasized Monroe's struggles with mental health, her dependence on medication, and the pressures of fame. Articles framed her death as a tragic but understandable outcome of a difficult life. The focus remained on personal vulnerability rather than external influence. Medical professionals reinforced this framing. Monroe's documented history of insomnia, anxiety, and depression was widely cited. Her reliance on prescribed sedatives was acknowledged as long-standing. Physicians involved in her care confirmed that she had access to powerful medications and had previously expressed emotional distress. From an institutional perspective, the explanation appeared internally consistent. The timeline aligned with known events. The toxicology findings supported overdose. The lack of physical injury reduced suspicion of violence. The locked bedroom door suggested privacy. There were no witnesses to contradict the sequence of events as presented. In the cultural context of the early 1960s, this was considered sufficient. mental health discussions were limited and often stigmatized. Suicide, while rarely spoken about openly, was understood through moral and emotional lenses rather than systemic ones. A woman portrayed as fragile and overwhelmed fit the narrative expectations of the time. The public was not encouraged to look deeper. There was no prolonged investigation, no grand jury inquiry, no public release of extensive documentation. The official ruling served as closure. It is important to understand how normal this was. At the time, deaths involving prominent figures were not automatically subjected to prolonged scrutiny unless there was clear evidence of a crime. Authority was centralized. Institutions were trusted to act competently and in good faith. Questioning official conclusions was not a default response. The media environment also mattered. News traveled through newspapers, radio, and limited television broadcasts. Investigative reporting existed, but it relied heavily on access to official sources. Without competing narratives amplified at scale, the official explanation dominated. The coroner responsible for Monroe's autopsy, Thomas Noguchi, later became well known for his work on high-profile cases. At the time, his role in Monroe's case was viewed as professional and unremarkable. His findings were accepted by authorities and the press alike. The official narrative did not deny that Monroe had relationships with influential people. It simply did not consider those relationships relevant to her death. Personal associations were treated as separate from medical conclusions. There was no suggestion that political proximity played a role. This separation was critical. By isolating the cause of death within Monroe's mental health and medical history, the explanation avoided broader implications. It framed the event as personal rather than political, individual rather than systemic. For many, this was reassuring. The country was already under strain. Cold War tensions, civil rights conflicts, and political uncertainty created an appetite for stability. A clear, contained explanation reduced discomfort. It allowed the public to grieve without confronting deeper questions about power or accountability. The narrative also aligned with Monroe's public image as it had been constructed. She was often portrayed as emotionally sensitive, dependent, and overwhelmed. These portrayals were selective, but they were familiar. The official explanation felt consistent with what people believed they knew. That consistency mattered more than completeness. From the perspective of institutions involved, there was little incentive to prolong inquiry. No evidence of a crime had been identified. No formal complaint was raised. The death occurred in a private residence with no indication of third-party involvement. The case was closed. In the years immediately following, references to Monroe's death remained largely unchanged. Official documents continued to list suicide as the cause. No revised rulings were issued. No formal reopenings occurred. When questions did arise, they were typically framed as speculative or emotional rather than evidentiary. The official story remained intact. It is also worth noting what the official narrative did not address, not as an omission, but as a matter of scope. It did not examine Monroe's broader social context. It did not explore the power dynamics of her relationships. It did not analyze the cultural pressures placed on women in her position. These were not considered part of a coroner's mandate. The focus remained narrow by design. This narrowness does not imply deception. It reflects how institutional explanations function. They answer specific questions using defined criteria. They are not designed to explore ambiguity beyond their jurisdiction. In this case, the question was how Monroe died. The answer, according to authorities, was an overdose resulting from intentional self-harm. Within that framework, the explanation was complete. And yet, completeness within a framework does not always translate to completeness in the public mind. The official narrative closed the case legally and medically. It did not close it culturally. As time passed, the clarity that initially comforted began to feel rigid to some observers. The speed of the conclusion, the absence of extensive documentation, and the reliance on private testimony left space for interpretation. But those interpretations did not emerge immediately. In the years following Monroe's death, the official story dominated. It was taught, repeated, and rarely challenged in mainstream discourse. Alternative explanations existed only on the margins, shared quietly rather than publicly. It would take time, distance, and shifting cultural attitudes for those margins to expand. Before examining those developments, it is essential to fully understand the official account on its own terms, not as something to be disproven, but as the foundation against which all later questions would be measured. Because every theory, every doubt, and every alternative explanation that followed was shaped by this original conclusion. The next section will explore how and why the first challenges to this narrative emerged, and what conditions allowed them to take hold. The first wave of conspiracy theories. The first challenges to the official explanation of Marilyn Monroe's death did not arrive as organized movements or polished arguments. They emerged quietly in fragments. A question here, a doubt there. Conversations held away from microphones, often dismissed before they could fully form. In the days immediately following the announcement of her death, most of the public accepted the official ruling. The language of tragedy felt familiar. The story aligned with what many believed they already knew about Monroe. But beneath that acceptance, something unsettled began to circulate. It started with timing. Monroe had been active in the weeks leading up to her death. She was reportedly planning future projects, renegotiating professional relationships, and re-engaging socially. While emotional instability had been part of her documented history, so had cycles of recovery and renewed focus. For some, the finality of the suicide ruling felt abrupt when placed against this context. These early doubts were not yet conspiratorial. They were expressions of discomfort rather than accusation. Friends, acquaintances, and members of the Hollywood community questioned whether the official narrative captured the full picture of Monroe's state of mind. But the questions did not remain limited to personal psychology for long. Within months, attention shifted toward Monroe's relationships, particularly those that extended beyond Hollywood. Rumors that had circulated privately during her life now gained renewed interest. These rumors centered on her proximity to political power and the potential implications of that proximity in an era defined by secrecy. The names most often whispered were those of John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. During Monroe's lifetime, her association with the Kennedy family had been the subject of speculation and tabloid interest. Public appearances, including a now iconic birthday performance, fueled curiosity. At the time, such interest was largely framed as scandalous but inconsequential, a reflection of celebrity culture rather than political significance. After her death, the framing shifted. Early theorists suggested that Monroe's relationships with powerful political figures placed her in a precarious position. The idea was not initially that she had been harmed, but that she may have known things she was not meant to know. Private conversations, personal frustrations, unfiltered opinions shared in informal settings. In a Cold War environment, informal access could be perceived as risk. These early theories were often vague. They did not claim evidence of murder. They suggested motive rather than method. The core idea was simple. Proximity to power can create vulnerability, especially for individuals without institutional protection. The first published suggestions of political involvement appeared in fringe journalism and independent writing. They were not treated as credible investigations. Instead, they were framed as gossip elevated by tragedy. Still, they found an audience willing to listen, if only quietly. Why did these ideas resonate at all? Part of the answer lies in the broader cultural moment. The early 1960s were marked by growing awareness that public narratives did not always reflect private realities. Intelligence operations were expanding, but their existence was rarely acknowledged openly. Political scandals, when they surfaced, revealed patterns of secrecy rather than transparency. In this environment, the idea that sensitive information might be suppressed did not feel implausible. Additionally, Monroe herself had become a symbol of contradiction. She was perceived as emotionally vulnerable, yet intellectually curious, publicly managed, yet privately defiant. Early theorists argued that this combination made her unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous in political contexts. The earliest conspiracy narratives did not suggest elaborate plots. They did not involve intelligence agencies or coordinated cover-ups. Instead, they framed Monroe's death as potentially accidental, mismanaged, or influenced by pressure rather than intention. One recurring idea was that of an accidental overdose that was later classified as suicide to avoid scrutiny. This explanation allowed room for institutional self-protection without asserting malice. It appealed to those who found the official story too clean, but were unwilling to assume criminal intent. Another early claim focused on emotional distress caused by political rejection or abandonment. In this framing, Monroe's proximity to powerful men intensified her sense of disposability. When those relationships ended, the emotional fallout was catastrophic. This theory preserved the suicide ruling while shifting its underlying cause from internal fragility to external harm. These interpretations reflected the gender dynamics of the time. Women's suffering was often explained through personal attachment rather than systemic pressure. Even when power was acknowledged, it was framed as emotional rather than structural. Still, the political dimension continued to expand. As more people revisited Monroe's final months, attention turned to reported meetings and communications that were not officially documented. Accounts varied, some were secondhand. Others emerged years later. Their credibility was debated even as they circulated. What mattered was not their accuracy, but their existence. Each additional claim, regardless of verification, reinforced the sense that Monroe's life intersected with forces beyond entertainment. The idea that she was merely a passive victim of her own struggles began to feel incomplete to some observers. Importantly, these early theories did not gain immediate traction in mainstream media. Newspapers and television largely avoided them. When they were mentioned, it was often to dismiss them as unfounded speculation. This dismissal played a role in their persistence. By excluding alternative interpretations from official discourse, institutions unintentionally reinforced the perception that something was being avoided. Silence became a catalyst rather than a deterrent. The people most drawn to these early theories were not fringe extremists or dedicated conspiracy thinkers. They were journalists, writers, and culturally engaged individuals who sensed dissonance between the narrative and the context. They asked questions like, why was there so little investigation? Why were certain relationships minimized? Why did the explanation rely so heavily on Monroe's perceived instability while ignoring her broader environment? These were not accusations. They were invitations to reconsider. Another factor contributing to early belief was the rapid closure of the case. The speed with which the suicide ruling was issued left little room for public processing. Grief was quickly followed by finality. For those uncomfortable with that transition, alternative explanations offered space to linger. The early conspiracy theories also benefited from Monroe's iconic status. Her image invited mythologizing. Tragedy, when paired with fame, often becomes narrative rather than fact. People searched for meaning that extended beyond medical conclusions. In this sense, the theories were less about proving wrongdoing and more about resisting reduction. They challenged the idea that a life as complex as Monroe's could be explained by a single line on a report. It is important to note what these first-wave theories did not include. They did not claim definitive evidence of murder. They did not allege coordinated intelligence operations. They did not accuse specific individuals of direct action. Those elements would appear later, shaped by decades of reinterpretation. At this stage, the theories were provisional, exploratory, and often contradictory. Their common thread was discomfort with certainty, not confidence in an alternative truth. They were shaped by the cultural limitations of their time. Information was scarce. Access to records was restricted. Verification was difficult. As a result, speculation filled the gaps. And yet, those gaps were real. As years passed, the early questions did not disappear. They waited. They were preserved in personal conversations, unpublished notes, and obscure publications. They remained dormant until cultural conditions changed. until trust in institutions weakened further, until new media platforms allowed old doubts to resurface. Before that evolution could occur, however, these first-wave theories had to establish a foundation. They had to articulate why Monroe's death deserved reconsideration, even without proof. They did so by focusing on context rather than conclusion, on proximity rather than action, on the idea that being close to power without being powerful can create risks that official narratives are not designed to address. These early theories did not claim to know what happened. They claimed only that the official story might not be the whole story. That claim, modest as it was, proved durable. In the next section, we will examine the specific evidence, patterns, and anomalies that later supporters would cite as justification for continued doubt, and how those fragments were assembled into more structured narratives over time. Evidence and patterns cited by supporters. By the time Marilyn Monroe's death had settled into public memory, the earliest doubts had already evolved into something more durable. Not because new definitive proof had surfaced, but because certain elements of the case resisted closure. Over time, supporters of alternative explanations began pointing to patterns, omissions, and inconsistencies that, taken together, suggested the official narrative might be incomplete. It is important to be precise about what this section represents. What follows is not an argument for any single conclusion. It is a reconstruction of the evidence, claims, and interpretations, most often cited by those who continue to question the suicide ruling. These elements vary widely in credibility. Some are documented facts. Others are disputed accounts. Many exist in a space of speculation shaped by absence rather than confirmation. Supporters often argue that it is the accumulation, not any single detail, that sustains doubt. One of the most frequently cited issues is the timeline of events on the night of Monroe's death. According to the official account, Monroe was last seen alive late in the evening of August 4, 1962. The precise timing of her final communications varies across accounts. Some witnesses reported phone calls that occurred later than expected. Others recalled attempts to reach her that went unanswered. These discrepancies are not unusual in death investigations, particularly those relying on human memory. Still, for skeptics, the lack of a clearly documented minute-by-minute timeline leaves room for interpretation. Supporters point to inconsistencies in statements provided by individuals present in Monroe's life that evening. Accounts differed regarding when concerns first arose, who was contacted, and in what order. These variations were never fully reconciled in a single, publicly released reconstruction. From an institutional standpoint, this was not required. The cause of death had already been determined. For critics, however, unresolved sequencing raises questions about whether all relevant details were examined thoroughly. Another focal point is the physical evidence related to the overdose itself. The toxicology report indicated extremely high levels of barbiturates in Monroe's system. Supporters of alternative explanations note that no empty pill bottles were conclusively documented at the scene. This absence has been interpreted in multiple ways. Some argue that Monroe may have ingested liquid forms of medication, which were available at the time. Others suggest that pills could have been removed before documentation. There is no verified evidence supporting removal, but the lack of photographic clarity has fueled speculation. Additionally, questions have been raised about how Monroe could have ingested such a large quantity of medication without leaving trace evidence consistent with oral consumption. Medical experts have offered explanations involving absorption rates and drug interactions, but supporters often cite early commentary that suggested inconsistencies between dosage levels and observed physical indicators. It is important to distinguish here between disputed interpretation and verified fact. The toxicology results themselves are not contested. What remains debated is the mechanism and timing of ingestion. Beyond the immediate medical findings, attention turns to documentation. Supporters frequently reference missing or incomplete records. Monroe was known to keep personal notes in journals. Reports emerged that certain materials were not recovered or were later destroyed. The contents of these materials, if they existed, remain unknown. There is no verified inventory confirming the nature or significance of any missing documents. However, the idea that personal writings may have disappeared has become central to alternative narratives. For some, this absence suggests intentional suppression. For others, it reflects routine estate management or privacy protection. What matters is not what those documents contained, but how their absence functions symbolically. Missing records create interpretive space. They invite projection. Similarly, law enforcement files related to the case were not extensively released to the public. This was consistent with standard practice at the time. Yet, in retrospect, limited transparency contributes to lingering suspicion. As years passed, declassified materials added another layer to the discussion. Files released by the FBI confirmed that Monroe had been the subject of monitoring, largely due to her associations with individuals connected to left-wing politics and foreign nationals. These files do not suggest involvement in espionage or criminal activity. They document observation, not intervention. Still, for supporters, the existence of surveillance reinforces the idea that Monroe was on the radar of powerful institutions. Even passive monitoring implies relevance. The CIA has also been mentioned in speculative accounts, though no declassified documents confirm direct involvement with Monroe. The absence of evidence is often interpreted in opposing ways. Skeptics view it as proof of non-involvement. Supporters argue that intelligence activities are, by nature, undocumented or withheld. This circular logic is a defining feature of conspiracy belief. Absence becomes confirmation rather than refutation. Testimony from friends and associates further complicates the picture. Over the years, individuals close to Monroe offered recollections that differed from the official portrayal of her final state of mind. Some described her as hopeful, energized, or determined shortly before her death. Others recalled distress, paranoia, or fear. These accounts are subjective and influenced by memory, emotion, and retrospective framing. They cannot be treated as definitive evidence. Yet their inconsistency challenges the simplicity of a singular emotional narrative. Supporters often emphasize statements suggesting Monroe felt trapped or threatened. These claims are difficult to verify and often emerged years later. Critics note that delayed testimony is unreliable. Supporters counter that fear discourages immediate disclosure. Another pattern cited involves the handling of the death scene itself. Reports indicate that Monroe's bedroom was cleaned before law enforcement completed a full forensic examination. At the time, forensic protocols were less rigorous than they are today. Scene preservation standards varied widely. Cleaning was not considered unusual, especially in private residences. Nevertheless, supporters argue that early disturbance of the scene compromised the integrity of the investigation. Even if unintentional, such actions limit the ability to reassess evidence later. Media framing also plays a role in sustaining doubt. Supporters point out that early coverage focused heavily on Monroe's emotional struggles, while minimizing discussion of her professional agency and intellectual life. This framing reinforced stereotypes that made suicide seem inevitable. By contrast, details that complicated that narrative received less attention. This selective emphasis is not evidence of wrongdoing, but it shapes perception. When media narratives align closely with official conclusions, alternative interpretations struggle to gain legitimacy. Symbolism has become another powerful component of belief. For many, Monroe represents more than an individual. She symbolizes vulnerability within systems of power. Her death is interpreted not only as an event, but as a statement about how society treats women who move beyond prescribed roles. In this symbolic framework, the idea of silencing takes on metaphorical meaning. It does not require a literal act. It can refer to narrative control, reputation management, or historical simplification. This interpretive layer complicates factual analysis. Symbolic truth operates independently of empirical proof. Supporters often acknowledge this distinction, even as they blur it. The emotional resonance of the story sustains interest where evidence alone might not. It is also necessary to address coincidences frequently cited in alternative accounts. These include overlapping travel schedules, last-minute cancellations, and reported visits that were never officially confirmed. Individually, these details may be inconsequential. Collectively, they are framed as patterns. Pattern recognition is a deeply human tendency. It becomes especially active when events lack satisfying explanations. In Monroe's case, the convergence of fame, power, secrecy, and tragedy creates fertile ground for such interpretation. At no point in this process is debunking the primary objective. Supporters are not always seeking proof of a specific outcome. Often, they are resisting closure itself. They argue that certainty is unwarranted given the number of unresolved elements. Critics respond that unresolved elements do not imply alternative causes. They reflect the limitations of historical record-keeping and human memory. Both positions coexist. What remains clear is that belief persists, not because of a single compelling piece of evidence, but because of layered uncertainty. Each omission, inconsistency, or unanswered question reinforces the sense that the story is unfinished. This persistence is not unique to Monroe. It appears in many cases where public figures die under ambiguous circumstances. What distinguishes Monroe's case is the scale of symbolic meaning attached to her life and death. As time passes, the distance from the original event increases. Memory becomes mediated through retelling. Facts coexist with interpretation. The line between evidence and narrative becomes less distinct. This does not invalidate the official account. It contextualizes the resistance to it. In the next section, we will examine how these early fragments evolved into more elaborate theories, how media and internet culture amplified them, and how counter-analysis emerged in response. The question is no longer simply what evidence exists, but why the absence of resolution continues to matter. Evolution, amplification, and counter-analysis. By the time the earliest doubts about Marilyn Monroe's death had settled into the background of public conversation, they had not disappeared. They had paused. What followed was not a straight line from question to conclusion, but a gradual expansion shaped by time, media, and changing cultural expectations. As years passed, the original uncertainties were revisited through new lenses. Each generation encountered the story differently, bringing with it new assumptions about power, secrecy, and credibility. What had once been quiet speculation began to acquire structure, vocabulary, and an audience. This was not because new evidence suddenly emerged, but because the environment for interpretation changed. In the late 1960s and 1970s, public trust in institutions eroded significantly. Political scandals, covert operations, and revelations about intelligence agencies altered how Americans understood official narratives. Events that had once seemed unthinkable became plausible in retrospect. In that climate, Monroe's death was re-examined not as an isolated tragedy, but as part of a broader pattern of concealed truths. Books played a central role in this evolution. Authors revisited earlier rumors and reframed them within a more explicit political context. What had once been framed as personal misfortune was now described as potential liability. The language shifted from doubt to suspicion. These works varied widely in quality and intent. Some relied heavily on anecdotal testimony. Others attempted to synthesize existing information into cohesive narratives. Few introduced verifiable new facts. What they did introduce was continuity. Theories were no longer isolated fragments. They became stories. Within these narratives, Monroe's proximity to power took on greater significance. Her reported relationships with John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy were reframed not as scandal, but as risk. The suggestion was not simply that she knew influential people, but that she occupied an informal space where boundaries were unclear and accountability diffuse. This reframing coincided with a growing awareness of how informal power operates. Influence was no longer understood solely through official titles. Access, discretion, and proximity mattered just as much. As a result, Monroe's role in these narratives shifted. She was no longer depicted solely as a victim of her own vulnerabilities. She became a figure caught between visibility and disposability, valuable until inconvenient. The rise of television documentaries further amplified this shift. Visual storytelling allowed speculation to feel more tangible. Reenactments, dramatic narration, and selective emphasis transformed uncertainty into atmosphere. These productions often presented competing interpretations side by side, maintaining a veneer of neutrality while subtly guiding audience perception. Music, pacing, and imagery filled gaps that evidence could not. Importantly, these documentaries did not claim to solve the mystery. They framed it as unresolved by design. This framing resonated with audiences increasingly skeptical of official explanations. It also aligned with the evolving true crime genre, which prioritized narrative tension over resolution. As media technology advanced, the internet accelerated these processes dramatically. Online forums allowed individuals to share documents, timelines, and interpretations without institutional mediation. Early conspiracy communities archived materials that were otherwise difficult to access. Declassified files, newspaper clippings, and personal letters were recontextualized endlessly. In this environment, Monroe's death became a collaborative puzzle. Participants did not need to agree on conclusions. They needed only to agree that questions remained. YouTube and long-form video essays marked a turning point. Algorithms rewarded engagement, and unresolved mysteries generated sustained attention. Creators revisited Monroe's story with fresh language, connecting it to broader themes of elite secrecy and historical cover-ups. Each retelling introduced subtle shifts. Timelines were tightened, motives were clarified, gaps were filled with implication. Over time, speculation hardened into expectation. This did not happen uniformly. Alongside amplification came increased scrutiny. Journalists, historians, and medical experts revisited the case with a critical eye. They addressed specific claims, challenged assumptions, and emphasized methodological rigor. Counter-analysis focused on several key points. First, experts noted that many inconsistencies cited by supporters are common in historical cases. Memory degrades. Testimony evolves. Documentation standards change. The absence of certain records does not imply their removal or suppression. Second, medical professionals reaffirmed that the toxicology findings were consistent with intentional overdose. While alternative ingestion methods have been proposed, they are not required to explain the observed results. Third, historians emphasize the lack of direct evidence linking Monroe's death to political intervention. No documents, recordings, or credible first-hand accounts substantiate claims of silencing or coercion. These critiques did not eliminate belief. They refined it. Supporters adapted by shifting emphasis away from provable actions and toward systemic plausibility. The argument became less about what definitively happened and more about what could have happened in a system designed to minimize exposure. This shift is critical to understanding why belief persists. Conspiracy narratives evolve when challenged. They absorb critique by reframing uncertainty as intentional obfuscation. Each rebuttal becomes further proof that truth is inaccessible by conventional means. This does not imply irrationality. It reflects a broader crisis of trust. Public faith in institutions had been damaged repeatedly over decades. Revelations involving intelligence agencies, political misconduct, and media manipulation created a baseline assumption that official narratives may be incomplete. In this context, Monroe's story functions as a proxy. It allows audiences to explore anxieties about power without requiring direct confrontation with contemporary figures. The persistence of belief is also tied to emotional coherence. For many, the idea that Monroe died solely as a result of personal despair feels unsatisfying. It places responsibility entirely on the individual and absolves systems that contributed to her vulnerability. Alternative narratives redistribute that responsibility. They suggest that environments matter. that power imbalances have consequences, that silence can be structural rather than accidental. This does not require a literal conspiracy to feel meaningful. Media incentives further complicate the landscape. Platforms reward content that sustains engagement. Nuance does not travel as far as implication. A question framed dramatically reaches more people than a conclusion delivered cautiously. As a result, the most visible versions of Monroe's story often emphasize tension over context. This reinforces polarization. Viewers are encouraged to choose between total acceptance and total rejection of the official narrative. In reality, most positions fall somewhere in between. Experts who engage seriously with the case tend to acknowledge unresolved elements without endorsing alternative conclusions. They emphasize that historical certainty is rare, especially in cases involving private lives and limited documentation. They also caution against retrofitting modern expectations onto past investigations. Standards of evidence, transparency, and accountability have changed significantly since 1962. These cautions are often overshadowed by more compelling narratives. The evolution of Monroe's conspiracy theories illustrates how stories adapt to cultural needs. Each generation finds new relevance in the same uncertainties. Each technological shift amplifies different aspects of the narrative. What began as quiet discomfort became organized speculation. What became speculation evolved into identity. For some, questioning the official account is less about Monroe herself and more about resisting institutional authority. Counter-analysis continues to exist, but it rarely resolves tension. It operates within frameworks that believers may not accept. This creates a stable equilibrium. The mystery persists not because it is unsolved, but because it serves a function. It allows ongoing negotiation between trust and doubt, between evidence and narrative, between history as record and history as meaning. As a result, Monroe's death remains suspended, neither conclusively closed nor definitively reopened. The question is no longer whether the official narrative is true or false. It is why alternatives continue to feel necessary. In the final section, we will examine the broader impact of this unresolved tension, how it shapes cultural memory, how it reflects human responses to power and uncertainty, and why some stories are never allowed to rest. Impact and uncertainty. There are stories that remain open, not because they lack answers, but because the answers offered never fully absorb the weight of what was lost. Marilyn Monroe's death exists in that space. More than 6 decades later, it continues to provoke reflection, not only about what happened, but about how societies process tragedy when power, secrecy, and vulnerability intersect. At this stage, the question is no longer confined to the specifics of August 1962. It has expanded outward, touching culture, psychology, and the ways narratives are shaped and sustained over time. The enduring impact of Monroe's death lies in how it disrupted certainty. She was not an obscure figure whose passing faded quietly into history. She was a cultural symbol, carefully constructed and widely consumed. Her image represented desire, optimism, and accessibility. When that image fractured, the rupture was collective. For many, the official explanation offered a way to contain that rupture. It framed the event as tragic but comprehensible. It placed responsibility within the boundaries of personal struggle. It allowed the public to mourn without confronting broader discomfort about the system surrounding her. For others, that containment felt insufficient. This divergence is central to understanding why uncertainty persists. Competing interpretations of Monroe's death reflect competing beliefs about how power operates and how much trust institutions deserve. Psychologically, humans are not well suited to unresolved endings. We seek coherence, especially when faced with loss. When explanations feel incomplete, the mind fills gaps. This is not a flaw, it is a survival mechanism. In Monroe's case, the gaps are not purely factual. They are emotional and symbolic. She lived in a world where access to power did not guarantee safety, where visibility did not ensure agency, where women were valued for proximity rather than autonomy. Her death forces a confrontation with those realities, whether or not one accepts alternative explanations. Culturally, Monroe's story has become a vessel for broader anxieties. It reflects fear of elite impunity, concern that narratives are managed rather than discovered, suspicion that truth is filtered through convenience. These concerns did not originate with Monroe, but her story provides a focal point. As trust in institutions declined over the decades, unresolved historical cases gained renewed relevance. They offered examples of ambiguity that seemed to validate contemporary skepticism. Media and technology have intensified this effect. Algorithms reward engagement, not resolution. Stories that remain open-ended generate discussion, reinterpretation, and return visits. Each retelling subtly reshapes perception, often emphasizing mystery over context. In this environment, uncertainty becomes durable. The line between inquiry and entertainment blurs. Reflection coexists with speculation. Viewers are invited to participate not by reaching conclusions, but by sustaining questions. This does not inherently distort truth, but it changes how truth is experienced. Marilyn Monroe's death is now less an event than a narrative ecosystem. It contains official reports, alternative theories, counter-analyses, cultural symbolism, and emotional investment. Each layer influences how the others are perceived. Within that ecosystem, certain unresolved elements continue to draw attention. There are records that remain sealed or were never created. Personal writings that were reportedly lost or destroyed. Testimonies that conflict without resolution. Decisions made quickly and documented minimally. None of these prove wrongdoing. They do, however, resist closure. Conflicting testimony, in particular, challenges the idea of a singular truth. Human memory is unreliable. It reshapes itself over time. Yet when memories diverge sharply, they raise questions about whose perspective became authoritative and why. Missing records operate similarly. Absence is not evidence, but it invites interpretation. In cases involving public figures, absence often feels intentional, even when it is not. The unresolved nature of these elements ensures that Monroe's story remains open to reinterpretation. At the same time, it is essential to acknowledge what uncertainty does not justify. It does not confirm alternative narratives by default. It does not imply conspiracy as a matter of fact. It does not override documented medical findings or institutional conclusions. Uncertainty exists alongside evidence, not in place of it. The tension arises when evidence answers one set of questions while leaving others untouched. Marilyn Monroe's death may be medically explained while remaining culturally unresolved. These states are not mutually exclusive. The persistence of doubt says as much about the audience as it does about the case. It reflects evolving expectations about transparency, accountability, and the treatment of vulnerable individuals within powerful systems. It also reflects discomfort with narratives that isolate responsibility within individuals while ignoring context. Whether one accepts the official ruling fully, partially, or not at all, Monroe's story forces a reckoning with how stories are closed. Who benefits from closure? Who is silenced by it? Who is remembered, and how? There is no definitive answer that satisfies all perspectives. That may be the point. Some stories endure not because they hide a secret, but because they expose a fault line. Marilyn Monroe's death sits at the intersection of fame and disposability, intimacy and power, vulnerability and control. In that intersection, certainty fractures. As time passes, distance does not necessarily clarify. It transforms. New generations encounter the story without the original context, but with inherited suspicion. They bring new frameworks, new language, and new concerns. The story adapts accordingly. This documentary has not attempted to resolve Marilyn Monroe's death. It has examined how and why resolution remains elusive. It has explored the conditions that made doubt possible, the narratives that sustained it, and the cultural forces that continue to amplify it. What remains are questions. Questions about how proximity to power alters risk, about how narratives are constructed and maintained, about how much truth is required for closure, and how much uncertainty societies are willing to tolerate. Marilyn Monroe remains a figure onto whom these questions are projected, not because she holds the answers, but because her life and death reveal the complexity of asking them. Before concluding, it is necessary to state clearly and explicitly the boundaries of this exploration. All claims discussed in this documentary are presented as allegations, interpretations, or theories drawn from public discourse. No claim has been asserted as fact beyond what is supported by official records and widely accepted historical documentation. This content is intended solely for informational and discussion purposes. There is no intent to defame, misrepresent, or accuse any individual or institution. The purpose has been to examine uncertainty, not to manufacture certainty. And so we end where we began, with reflection rather than resolution. With the understanding that some stories remain open, not because truth is hidden, but because meaning continues to evolve. Thank you for watching Whims and Whispers. If you found this exploration thoughtful or compelling, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And if there is another historical mystery or conspiracy you would like to see examined with the same care, let us know in the comments. Some stories do not end. They linger,